They gave away a black baby girl because of fear. 30 years later, that same girl holds the power to save their lives. But just as truth surfaces, so do devastating secrets. Hidden paternity, forgotten family ties, and a granddaughter born into redemption. This isn't just a story about kidneys. It's about guilt, forgiveness, and a family reborn. Where are you watching from? Tell me below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will move your heart and shake your soul. They always said we never had children. Even our closest friends, our old church group, Edward's firefighter buddies, they all believed it. I suppose in a way, it was easier to let them believe the lie than confront the truth we buried for 30 long years. But now, sitting in this cold hospital room, staring at a monitor flashing out numbers I don't fully understand, I can't pretend anymore. Edward was lying in the bed next to mine, his face pale and sunken. The doctor had just left after delivering the news. Our kidneys were failing. Both of ours. The toxins from that chemical fire last year, God, we both thought we were lucky to survive the smoke. We didn't know it had crept into our blood like a quiet thief, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now here it was. No pain at first, no warning. Just the truth. 1 kidney each, beyond repair. Time running out. Isn't it strange, Edward said, his voice dry and quiet, that after all these years we're dying side by side? I tried to smile but couldn't. The beeping of the machines felt louder than ever, almost accusing. A sharp reminder of all we had done and all we hadn't. Dr. Lindley, our nephrologist, had asked gently if we had any relatives who could be tested as donors. Children, maybe? Siblings? I had forced myself to shake my head. We don't have kids, I told her, and it wasn't even the words that hurt. It was how easily they came out. After all this time, the lie still fit like an old glove. But the truth was we had a daughter, a beautiful baby girl with soft brown skin and the tiniest fingers I'd ever held. She was born in the spring of 1995 during a rainstorm. I still remember the smell of the hospital room, like antiseptic and lilacs from a bouquet someone had left behind. I'd sung to her while she lay against my chest, trying not to cry, trying to memorize her warmth before I gave her away. Her name was Hope. She wasn't biologically mine, not entirely. My best friend Valerie couldn't have children, and she'd asked me, begged me really, to carry her baby. It was going to be a private surrogacy, just between the 3 of us. Her eggs, her husband's sperm, my body. No lawyers, no contracts, just trust. And for the first 6 months, that trust held. Until the night the phone rang and shattered everything. Valerie and her husband James died in a car crash 3 months before the due date. Drunk driver, no family to take the baby. No instructions, just silence. Edward and I were already struggling then. New jobs, new town, and a town that didn't take kindly to complications. We were the only white couple in a neighborhood that looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. And when I started showing, the whispers came. You sure that baby's his? Poor Edward. Wonder if he knows. I could barely go to the grocery store without feeling their eyes on my belly. After Valerie died, I thought for one wild moment we'd keep the baby, raise her ourselves, give her the love she deserved. But Edward, he was scared, and I was, too. His parents were furious when they found out. It'll ruin your life, his mother said. She won't belong anywhere. Even my school job was on the line. One administrator quietly told me, you have to think about appearances. And so, we gave her up, told the agency we couldn't raise her, said we hoped she'd go to a good home. They promised she would. We named her Hope and walked out of that hospital with empty arms and heavier hearts than I can ever explain. We never talked about her after that. Not really. Once a year, I'd take out the little box, photos from the first few weeks, a letter Valerie had written to the baby during the pregnancy, a hospital bracelet. I'd sit in the attic and cry. And then I'd put it all away and go back to being Helen Grant, childless schoolteacher and faithful wife. Until now. Back in the hospital room, I sat up straighter in bed and reached for the small purse I always kept nearby. Inside was my tablet. I hadn't touched it in days. Edward noticed and raised an eyebrow. What are you doing? I didn't answer. My fingers were already typing. I started with the name we were given by the agency all those years ago. Kira Hope Carter. They told us the new family had changed her name, but we remembered the update letters, until they stopped when she was 5. I didn't know what I expected. The internet is a big place. I didn't even know if she was alive, if she was healthy, if she ever thought of us. But I had to try. I couldn't let this be how the story ended. I clicked search. A handful of results came up. A few social media pages, but none that matched her age. Then I saw it, an article from a medical journal, of all places. Dr. Kira Carter, lead nephrologist at Brookside Medical Center. There was a photo. She was wearing a white coat, arms crossed, standing in front of the hospital building. She looked strong, poised. Her eyes, God help me, her eyes looked just like Valerie's. My hands trembled as I turned the tablet toward Edward. "It's her," I whispered. He stared at the screen for a long time. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "She's a kidney doctor, Ed." We both laughed then, soft, disbelieving laughter, the bitter kind. We were dying of kidney failure, and the daughter we gave away was a kidney doctor. You could call it fate. You could call it karma. But in that moment, it felt like a cruel joke from the universe. Then something shifted in Edward's eyes, a kind of resignation. "She's at Brookside," he asked. "That's, what, 45 minutes from here?" 43, I said, already checking directions. We sat in silence for a few moments, letting it all sink in. The machines beeped. The nurses moved past our door, and our past stared us in the face through a glowing screen. "I don't want to ask her for anything," Edward said finally. "Not after what we did." "I'm not asking her to save us," I replied. "I'm asking for a chance to tell her the truth, before it's too late." He nodded slowly. Then he reached over and took my hand. "Then let's go meet our daughter." And just like that, the lie we had told the world for 3 decades started to unravel. One search result, one heartbeat at a time. We didn't sleep the night before the appointment. Edward snored gently for a while, but I could tell it was shallow rest, his body shutting down while his mind kept spinning, just like mine. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan and counting the blades each time they passed, trying not to imagine what it would be like to see her again. Would she recognize me? Would she hate me? Would she even believe the truth if we told her? Brookside Medical Center looked like any other suburban hospital. Beige brick, too many glass windows, a parking lot that stretched forever. But as we pulled in that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something enormous was about to happen. Something that would either break us further or begin to stitch us back together. I wore the navy blue dress Edward always said made me look like someone who knows what she's doing. It felt silly, trying to impress someone I hadn't seen since she was swaddled in a pink hospital blanket. But I needed armor, even if it was just polyester and buttons. The waiting room was unusually quiet for a Tuesday. I sat next to Edward, pretending to flip through a gardening magazine while my palms sweated into my purse straps. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, jaw tight. I knew that look. It meant he was afraid. A nurse in blue scrubs stepped through the door. "Mrs. Helen Grant?" I stood quickly. "That's me." Edward didn't move. "You coming?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. He shook his head slightly. "Too much all at once. Go ahead. Meet her first." I hesitated, then nodded. I understood. We'd rehearsed the conversation dozens of times the night before. How we'd explain it, how we'd be honest but careful. But all the words evaporated as I followed the nurse down the hallway. The examination room was small and sterile, like every hospital room I'd ever stepped into. The walls were lined with framed diplomas, Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, a Mayo Clinic fellowship. I recognized her name on all of them, Dr. Kira H. Carter. I sat on the exam table, legs dangling like a nervous child, rehearsing lines in my head. "You were wanted. We were scared. You looked just like your mother." But they all sounded rehearsed, hollow. I clenched and unclenched my fists, breathing in the scent of disinfectant and something floral, probably from the nurse's lotion. Then the door opened. She stepped in, and for a second I couldn't speak. My breath caught somewhere between my ribs. She was stunning. Tall, graceful, with her braids swept back into a neat twist. Her white coat fit perfectly, and she moved with the ease of someone who commanded every room she entered. But it wasn't just that. It was her eyes. Valerie's eyes, sharp, intelligent, soft when they wanted to be. "Mrs. Grant?" she asked, offering a hand. I stood to shake it, my throat tightening. "Yes. Hello, doctor." Her grip was warm, firm. "I'm Dr. Carter. I'll be overseeing your kidney treatment moving forward. It's nice to meet you." "You've already met me," I wanted to say. You just don't remember. The pleasure is mine, I managed to whisper. She smiled politely and sat at the desk, opening a sleek laptop. I've reviewed your case file. Both you and your husband are dealing with rapid kidney deterioration, likely linked to environmental exposure. There are several treatment options, though transplantation remains the most effective. I nodded mechanically, the words washing over me. I couldn't focus. Not when every gesture she made felt familiar. Her posture, the way she tilted her head when explaining something. All echoes of a woman I once called sister. Mrs. Grant, she asked gently, are you following me? I blinked, forcing my attention back. Yes. I'm sorry, it's just overwhelming. Her expression softened. Of course. Kidney failure is serious, but you're not alone. We'll walk through this together. Our transplant outcomes here are excellent, and I'll personally guide your care. She kept speaking, and I tried to listen. Truly I did, but I couldn't stop staring. Her smile was James. Her tone, even the thoughtful pauses, those were Valerie's. Every second in that room was like watching ghosts pass through her. I asked her, just to keep her talking. How long have you been at Brookside? Almost 2 years. I moved here from Boston. My husband's an architect. We wanted to settle somewhere quieter before starting a family. I flinched. Family. Did she have one already? Do you have children? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Not yet, but we're hoping soon. I nodded, covering my stumble with a fake smile. Sorry, I just feel like I've seen you before. She tilted her head, considering. I give talks at local clinics sometimes, or maybe you caught an article? Maybe. As the appointment ended, she stood and said, I'd like to meet your husband as well. Since you're both patients, it's important to coordinate care. He's in the waiting room, I said, voice tight. Wasn't feeling well enough to join us. When she finally stepped out and called Edward in, I waited with bated breath. The moment he walked in and saw her, I saw it in his face. The recognition, the awe, the guilt. Mr. Grant, she said, extending her hand. I'm Dr. Carter. I'll be treating you and your wife. Edward took her hand like he was holding glass. It's an honor, he said softly. She nodded, her professionalism unwavering. But something flickered behind her eyes. A question maybe, a hesitation. After we scheduled our next tests and stepped out into the hallway, Edward leaned heavily on my arm. She's incredible, he whispered. I know, I said, tears stinging my eyes. She's ours. That night, back in our living room, we pulled out the old box. Photos, letters, a hospital bracelet marked Baby Girl Carter. We laid them out on the table like sacred artifacts. I need to tell her, I said, more to myself than to him. Not yet, Edward replied. She's not ready, and we need to be sure we're doing it for her, not just because we're scared. I looked down at the photo of Valerie, 8 months pregnant, her hands resting protectively on her belly. I'd taken that photo. She'd laughed after, teasing me for capturing her swollen ankles. She deserves the truth, I whispered, no matter what she does with it. Edward nodded, but his face was troubled. He was thinking what I was too. What if it's too late? What if the daughter we gave away had already built a life, one that didn't need us in it? But she was already in our lives again. Whether by accident, fate, or divine intervention, she was back. And something told me, this was only the beginning. The next time we saw her, it wasn't in a clinic or behind a doctor's desk. It was in her office, and she didn't smile when we walked in. I could tell something had changed. The message had come through that morning from her assistant. Dr. Carter would like to discuss your most recent lab results in person. It is not related to your kidneys. Not related to our kidneys? That could only mean one thing. Edward had barely spoken the whole drive over. He stared out the window, jaw clenched tight, fingers twitching in his lap, like they were remembering all the tools they used to hold when he was a firefighter. I knew that silence well. It was the kind of quiet that came right before everything fell apart. Her office was warm, polished, full of books and framed certificates. I noticed a new photo on her desk, a smiling couple, arms around each other on a beach. Her and her husband. He was handsome, and her eyes looked lighter in the picture, freer somehow. That stung a little. Not jealousy, but something deeper. A sense of loss. That we had no part in helping her build this beautiful, bright life. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice clipped, focused. She didn't motion for us to sit, but we did anyway. She remained standing, one hand resting on the back of her chair like she needed something to anchor her. When we analyze blood for transplant compatibility, she began, we screen for a variety of markers, blood type, tissue match, and certain genetic traits that can affect organ rejection risk. We both nodded. In Mrs. Grant's blood sample, she continued, I found a rare genetic variant, one I've only ever seen once before. My heart pounded. I felt Edward's hand close over mine. She looked me dead in the eye. My own. The room fell quiet. I ran additional analysis, she said, this time sitting, placing a folder on the desk between us. Her hands shook slightly as she pushed it toward us. Based on your blood work and mine, we share multiple genetic markers. It's statistically improbable for two unrelated individuals to share this combination. She didn't say the next part. I did. You're our daughter, I whispered, barely able to breathe. But she didn't react the way I dreamed. No tears, no embrace. Her face was unreadable, her voice clinical. You're not my biological mother. The records list you as my birth mother, yes. But biologically? I nodded. Valerie was your mother. She was my best friend. She couldn't carry a child, so I offered. I carried you for her and James. Her expression cracked, just a flicker. James Robinson? Yes, Edward said, voice hoarse. They were killed in an accident right before you were born. You had no next of kin. We didn't know what to do. We were young, scared, and... He didn't finish. You gave me away, she said flatly. We thought it would be best, I said quickly, the words tumbling over each other. You're black. We were two white people living in a small, very white town. There was so much ignorance. We thought you deserved more. Culture, belonging, parents who wouldn't make you feel like a stranger in your own home. Kira leaned back in her chair, arms folded. So you abandoned me for my benefit. I flinched. We hoped you'd be adopted by a family that could love you the way we couldn't. And you were. You were. I was, she said softly. The Carters were amazing parents. My mom, Rochelle, is Valerie's cousin. That shocked me. You knew Valerie? She nodded slowly. My mom told me stories about her, but she didn't know much, just that Valerie had passed and that I was born through a complicated situation. And Thomas? Edward asked. Your dad? Kira's voice cracked for the first time. He's in the hospital right now. Kidney failure. It came on suddenly. No warning. She rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. So now I have 3 parents with failing kidneys, 3 people who raised me, created me, or carried me, all needing the same miracle. I didn't know what to say. None of us did. Kira stood up, walked to the window, and stared out. Did my parents know about you? About this? They never reached out, Edward said. They knew who you were, she replied without turning. They sent updates for 5 years. You never answered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. We were told not to. Our lawyer said it would be confusing, that it would hurt you more. We thought we were doing the right thing. And now you're here because you need something. No, I said firmly. We came because we saw your face, because the universe put us in your care, and we realized we couldn't go another day without telling you the truth, even if you never speak to us again. She turned back, her eyes red. You expect me to believe that? That this is all just coincidence? Edward looked her dead in the eyes. We were assigned to you. We didn't know you worked here until after we were referred. We didn't plan this. Silence. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out something small and familiar. My heart stopped. The locket. The one I'd given her last week. The one that had once belonged to Valerie. I opened it, she said. The photo inside. Was that her, Valerie? I nodded. Kira opened the drawer wider and pulled out a letter, yellowed at the edges, folded many times. My breath caught. That's her letter, I whispered. She wrote that to you before the accident. I know. Kira looked down at it. She said something in here. Something I didn't understand until now. She hesitated. She said James wasn't my biological father. I stared at her. What? She wrote that before reconciling with James. She had a brief relationship. She doesn't name him. She just says she hoped he'd never find out. She looked up at Edward. I think she was talking about you. Edward's mouth opened, then shut again. No, he said. That's not possible. Isn't it? She asked. He looked at me, eyes wide. It was years before we were married, he said. It was just one night. Valerie and James had broken up. I thought it didn't mean anything. Clearly it did, she said. Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. Then her phone buzzed. She picked it up, read the message, and closed her eyes. "It's my father," she said. "He's crashing. They're moving him to the ICU." She grabbed her coat, turning back to us just as she reached the door. "This conversation isn't over. Meet me tomorrow at noon, and Mr. Grant, bring a DNA sample." And with that, she was gone. The door closed, and I turned to Edward. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Is it possible?" I whispered. He didn't answer right away. Then softly he said, "I don't know. God help me. I really don't know." The next morning came far too quickly. I hadn't slept, not really. I drifted in and out, each time waking with the same cold weight in my chest. Kira's voice in that office, the way she looked at Edward like she was seeing him for the first time, and not in the way a daughter sees her father. Edward had been up even earlier than I was. I found him at the kitchen table, staring at the small plastic tube from the home DNA kit. His fingers moved over it like it might burn him. "You ready?" I asked softly. He didn't look at me when he answered. "No, but let's go anyway." Brookside was busier that day, the waiting room packed with the sick and the worried. We were directed not to the usual exam room, but to a private consultation space in the genetics lab. When we entered, Kira was already there, dressed in her scrubs, a tablet in hand. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, or maybe crying, but her posture was rigid, guarded. "Thank you for coming," she said without warmth, though not exactly cold either. Just precise. "We brought the sample," Edward said, his voice clipped, formal. "Good." She nodded to a technician, who gently took the swab and disappeared. "Since I already have my DNA on file, we can expedite the results. Should only take a few hours." She motioned for us to sit. We did, but not comfortably. The silence pressed on us like a second atmosphere. Kira turned back to her tablet, pulling up files. "While we wait, there's something else I need to talk to you about." My stomach clenched. I didn't know how much more something else I could handle. "I've been reviewing all three of your cases, yours, Edward's, and my father's. You all have similar progression patterns. The same rare variant is present in all of you. That's not a coincidence." "You think it's genetic?" I asked. "I know it is," she said. "The variant affects how the immune system responds to kidney tissue, especially after environmental triggers, like the chemical exposure you and my father both experienced." "And you have it too," Edward said quietly. Kira nodded. "It's dormant in me. I haven't been exposed to anything that could activate it, but it means I'm a potential carrier, and so are my children if I have any." She said that last part softly, eyes dropping for a moment. "You're pregnant," I said gently, more a realization than a question. Kira nodded, almost imperceptibly. 8 weeks. Emotion swept over me. Shock, joy, concern. Our grandchild. We had a grandchild on the way. But the circumstances made it feel too fragile to celebrate. "I've been researching an experimental protocol," she continued, "involving partial kidney cell transplant combined with stem cell therapy. Instead of replacing the entire kidney, it introduces regenerative tissue repair the damage and suppress the immune response." "You could do that?" Edward asked. Kira nodded. "The technique's risky. It's in early stages, but it's shown promise. The catch is that the donor needs to carry the same genetic variant, but without the environmental exposure." "You mean someone like you?" I said. "Yes," she said simply. "My tissue could help all three of you." "No," I said instantly. "You're pregnant." Kira's face was unreadable. "The version of the protocol I'm considering doesn't involve kidney removal. It uses bone marrow and blood components. The risk is lower." "But it's still a risk," Edward said firmly. "You're not doing this. Not for us." "You're not asking," she said, voice steady. "I'm offering. I took an oath to help people. And right now, I might be the only one who can." Before we could say another word, a nurse knocked and stepped into the room, looking visibly tense. "Dr. Carter, your father's vitals are dropping again. They're moving him to the ICU." Kira stood immediately, her professional mask slipping. For a moment, we saw it, the daughter behind the doctor, the fear, the love. She turned back to us just as she reached the door. "We don't have time to debate this. If my father doesn't receive treatment soon, we'll lose him." "We'll find another way," I pleaded. "You can't put yourself, your baby, at risk." Kira opened her mouth to reply, but at that moment, the elevator at the end of the hallway dinged open. "Mom, Dad, Emily." She came rushing toward us, a vision of nervous energy, cheeks pink from the cold air outside. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her college sweatshirt was wrinkled like she'd driven straight from campus. I met her halfway, wrapping my arms around her before she could even finish taking a breath. "You made it," I whispered. "Of course," she said. "You said someone needed help." She looked past me toward Kira, who had turned to watch. Their eyes met, and even though they looked nothing alike, there was something mirrored in their expressions. A seriousness, a stillness, a spark of understanding neither of them could name yet. Kira took a slow step forward. "You must be Emily." Emily nodded. "And you're my sister." They stared at each other for a moment longer. "I understand you might need my help," Emily said, lifting her chin. "Just tell me what to do." Within the hour, the genetics lab confirmed it. Emily had the same variant, but she'd never been exposed to any of the environmental triggers that had damaged the rest of us. She was young, healthy, and the perfect match for the experimental transplant. She barely hesitated before signing the consent forms. As the doctors prepared to collect her marrow and blood samples, Edward and I waited outside, hands clasped tightly, barely speaking. "She didn't even hesitate," I whispered. "She's always been like that," Edward said softly, pride and grief tangled in his voice. "Just like her sister, apparently." The procedure went smoothly. They took what they needed, and by nightfall, the transplant prep for Thomas, Edward, and me had begun. I kept replaying the image in my mind. Kira and Emily standing face to face in that hallway. Two daughters, two strangers. Two halves of a broken story finally meeting at the crossroads of fate and medicine. And through it all, one question burned in my chest. What happens when the daughter you gave away becomes the one who saves your life? I didn't know the answer yet, but I had a feeling tomorrow would bring more than a cure. It would bring a reckoning, one we were long overdue to face. Emily's donation went as smoothly as we could have hoped. The doctor said she was brave, calm, and surprisingly stoic for someone her age. But I already knew that about my daughter. She'd always had a quiet kind of strength, the kind that didn't demand attention, just showed up when it mattered most. And now, that strength might end up saving 3 lives. The experimental treatment was underway. They'd started with Thomas, Kira's adoptive father, since his condition was the most critical. Edward and I were scheduled next, assuming Thomas responded well to the therapy. There was hope in the air again, a cautious hope, like a spring breeze after a brutal winter. But for all the physical healing taking place, something deeper was beginning to unravel, threads that tied our past and present together in ways none of us had seen coming. 2 days after Emily's procedure, we returned to the hospital to check in with Kira. She looked exhausted. The circles under her eyes were darker, her posture less upright. She wasn't just a doctor anymore. She was a daughter caught between 2 families, a mother-to-be, worrying about the life growing inside her, and a woman still trying to understand where she came from. We met in her office again, but this time, the atmosphere was different. Warmer, less clinical. She even smiled briefly when we walked in. "My dad's responding to the treatment," she said, without waiting for us to sit. "It's too early to know for sure, but his numbers have stabilized. It's a good sign." I exhaled the breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. "That's wonderful," I said, "truly." She nodded, then gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit. There's something else I want to talk to you about." We sat. Kira pulled out her tablet again, but this time she wasn't looking at medical files. Instead, she tapped open a folder labeled simply, Heritage. "I've been doing some digging," she began, "trying to piece together more about my biological history. Not just the surrogacy, but everything." She paused, then looked at me. "Tell me about Valerie." I blinked. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," she said softly. "Who she was, what she loved, what kind of person she was." So I told her. I told her how Valerie used to sing Aretha Franklin songs at the top of her lungs while we did our homework, how she braided my hair better than anyone, even though mine was thin and slippery and drove her crazy. How she once marched straight into the principal's office in high school because he tried to suspend a black student for something a white kid only got detention for. Valerie had courage and fire, but also kindness. She could make people feel seen, truly seen, just by looking at them. Kira didn't say much as I spoke. She just listened, eyes glossy, her fingers quietly fidgeting with the pen on her desk. I could tell she was memorizing it, hoarding every detail. She'd grown up without Valerie's voice, Valerie's touch, and no amount of medical success could replace that kind of absence. She would have been so proud of you, I said, my throat tightening. So unbelievably proud. Kira gave a small nod. I wish I had a memory of her, just one. Then she looked at Edward. And what about you? He stiffened. What do you mean? Her eyes didn't flinch. Did you love her? It was a question loaded with history and pain, and for a second, I didn't breathe. Edward didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. We weren't in love, he said finally. It was one night. We were both hurting. James had left her for a while. I'd just gone through a breakup. It wasn't planned. It wasn't romantic, but I respected her, and I never forgot. Kira absorbed that quietly. Did you know I might be your daughter? She asked. Edward shook his head. Not until you mentioned the letter. And then, everything clicked. Kira let out a slow breath, then tapped something on her tablet. I confronted my parents the night you gave me the locket, she said. Asked them if they knew anything. My mom, Rochelle, finally told me everything. She turned the screen toward us. It was a scanned photo, old and grainy. A young black woman standing next to an older white man at what looked like a family barbecue. This is my mom's aunt, Dorothy, and her husband, William. He was from Millfield, lived there briefly before he got transferred to Chicago. I blinked at the image. I've seen her before, I said. That's Valerie's grandmother. Kira nodded. Exactly. My mom said Valerie's mother was born shortly after Dorothy moved back home from Millfield. The timeline matches. What are you saying? Edward asked, eyes narrowing. I think Valerie and I were related, I said, slowly. Maybe cousins. Maybe half-sisters. Kira nodded. That would explain the genetic variant showing up in both of us. Even though you were the surrogate, you may also have been biologically connected to her, and therefore, to me. The silence that followed felt like it stretched for years. Edward cleared his throat. So what does that mean? We're all tangled up in the same family tree? Kira gave a small, tired laugh. Something like that. Then her smile faded. But there's more. My adoptive father, Thomas, he grew up believing his own brother had kidney issues due to bad lifestyle choices. But now we know it wasn't that. His brother married into a family with the same genetic variant, and Thomas, he was exposed to similar chemicals as you were. That's why it hit him too, I murmured, like a silent trigger. Kira nodded. All these years, none of us knew we were walking around with the same fuse inside us, waiting for something to light it. I felt dizzy, not just from the science, but from the sheer weight of it all. So, what happens now? I asked. Kira looked out the window, her hand resting on her belly. I have a child to think about, she said. A husband who doesn't know half of this yet, a father recovering from a transplant, a little sister I've just met, and two people sitting in front of me who gave me away once, and now might be the reason I understand who I really am. She turned back to us. I'm not angry anymore. I was, but not now. Tears welled in my eyes. But I need time, she continued. Time to figure out what kind of relationship I want, what kind of future I'm willing to open up to. Because this, it's not just about blood. I nodded. Whatever time you need, take it. Edward echoed me. We're not going anywhere. She gave a quiet smile and stood. Then let's see what the DNA test says, she said, as if the rest of the conversation hadn't already revealed the truth. But I think we all knew what it would confirm. And somehow, I think we were all ready. The DNA results arrived the following morning, printed neatly on a single sheet of paper sealed inside a hospital envelope. No ceremony, no preamble, just facts, numbers, probabilities, and the truth. Edward read it aloud in the small consultation room, voice barely above a whisper. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. I felt it before I fully processed it, the quiet exhale from somewhere deep inside me. Not relief, not regret either, just release. Like something we'd carried in silence for 30 years had finally landed. No more wondering, no more maybe. Edward was Kira's biological father. And now, somehow, our roles in her life had gone from abstract to undeniable. Kira didn't react. She sat across from us, hands folded tightly in her lap, the envelope resting on the table between us like a courtroom verdict. I thought I'd feel different, she said after a long moment. Like it would explain something, make the anger vanish, but it doesn't. Edward nodded slowly. I wouldn't expect it to. Her eyes flicked to him. When I was 16, I used to dream about my biological parents. I had no idea if they were alive, or if they cared, or if they even remembered me. Some nights, I thought maybe I was the result of something awful. Other nights, I imagined they were poets or scientists, people who had to give me up for reasons beyond their control. But never once did I imagine this. She paused, as if choosing her next words carefully. I didn't think it would be a white firefighter from Millfield and his wife, who carried me and let me go. My mouth was dry. We know we don't deserve your forgiveness. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word, she said. I think it's more like understanding. At that moment, a nurse appeared at the door. Dr. Carter, your father is asking for you. Vitals are unstable again. Kira's eyes closed briefly. She stood and excused herself without another word, the door clicking softly behind her. Edward and I remained seated, neither of us speaking. That small envelope still lay between us. I stared at it until the black print blurred. That number, 99.98%, was more than science. It was the weight of 30 years of choices, lies, and love twisted up in one unshakable number. About an hour later, we found Kira again, this time in the ICU hallway. She was leaning against the wall, one hand resting protectively over her belly. They stabilized him, she said quietly, but just barely. We're so sorry, I whispered. She looked at me then, eyes tired but soft. He's been everything to me. He taught me to ride a bike, to parallel park, to stand up for myself. Even when I failed a big chemistry test in college and wanted to change my major, he just told me, so what? One test doesn't decide who you are. Her voice cracked. He's been my dad. I can't imagine losing him. I stepped closer, wanting to comfort her, but stopping short of reaching out. What can we do? I asked. Anything. Tell us. She turned toward me, her eyes suddenly sharp with urgency. Emily, is she still in town? She's at the hotel, Edward answered. Resting. Why? Kira hesitated, then pulled us into a nearby conference room and closed the door. I need to ask something difficult, she said, voice low. The transplant worked, yes, but my father's system is reacting faster than we anticipated. If we don't intervene again within the next 24 hours, he won't make it. But you already used Emily's marrow, I said. She was approved for multiple extractions, but it depends on the timeline, and the variant expression in her immune cells is unique. What does that mean? It means, Kira said carefully, she's our best and maybe only shot to save him, again. We didn't hesitate. Edward pulled out his phone, already dialing. Emily was there within the hour, hair still damp from the shower, eyes clear despite how fast she'd rushed over. When we told her what Kira needed, she didn't flinch. Of course, she said. When do we start? You're sure? I asked. You just gave so much. Emily smiled gently. He's her dad. That makes him family, right? And anyway, I feel fine. If I can help, I want to. She turned to Kira, who'd been unusually quiet through the whole explanation. You're my sister, Emily said. I don't know what that means yet, but I'd rather figure it out with you alive and your dad alive too. That was the first time I saw Kira truly break. She nodded once, then burst into quiet, shaking tears. Emily stepped forward and hugged her, and for a second, Kira resisted. But then her arms wrapped around her younger sister, and they stood there, two women who didn't share a childhood or memories, only blood, pain, and now the beginnings of a future. The second donation went ahead that night. Emily's sample was taken and administered within hours. The ICU stayed quiet through the early morning, every footstep in the hallway making my heart jolt. At 5:42 a.m., Kira texted me a single sentence. He's stable again. It's working. I showed the message to Edward, and for the first time since we entered that hospital, I saw his shoulders relax. He reached for my hand, squeezing it so tightly I thought he might break it. We sat in silence for a while, the sterile waiting room around us feeling just a little warmer than before. I used to wonder what she'd look like, I said quietly. As a baby, then as a teenager, then as a woman. I used to picture her laughing. Sometimes I imagined her getting married. I wondered if she'd have my stubbornness or your sarcasm. Edward looked down at his lap. She has both. I smiled, despite everything. Yeah, she really does. When the sun rose, golden light poured through the windows of the hospital, painting the walls with something close to hope. Kira met us in the corridor. still wearing her scrubs, hair pulled back, eyes red but alive. "She's resting," she said, referring to Emily. "She's amazing." "We know," Edward said. Kira hesitated, then added, "He's awake. My dad, he wants to see you." "Us?" I blinked. "Are you sure?" "He knows everything," she said softly. "I told him, about Valerie, about the letter, about the test, about you." "And?" Edward asked. "He said if we have the chance to expand this family, maybe we should." She looked at us then, fully, clearly, and without bitterness. "Do you want to meet him?" I reached for Edward's hand, our fingers interlacing. "Yes," I said. "We really do." And so, in a quiet hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and coffee and second chances, we met the man who'd raised our daughter, the man who called her Pumpkin when she was small and taught her to drive and cheered at her medical school graduation. We shook hands, we talked, and for the first time in 3 decades I felt like the circle we'd torn open so long ago had finally started to close. 3 days later, the sun rose gently over Brookside Medical Center, casting long slats of golden light through the glass windows of the hospital garden. That morning felt different, quiet in a good way, peaceful, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled after weeks of holding tension just beneath the surface. Thomas Carter was awake. More than that, he was improving. Kira had spent most of the night by his side, watching over his vitals, reviewing lab results, coordinating follow-ups with the transplant team. But when we saw her walking toward us in the cafeteria that morning, she didn't look like a doctor. She looked like a daughter. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, her hospital badge tucked in her coat pocket, and her eyes softer than they'd been since the first day we met. "You'll be glad to hear," she said, sitting across from us, "that your numbers are holding steady too. The protocol's working." Edward and I exchanged a look of cautious relief. We'd been afraid to hope, afraid that the very moment we allowed ourselves to believe we might actually recover, the rug would be pulled out from under us again. But there it was, life, stubborn and steady. "I still don't understand how Emily was such a perfect match," Edward said, shaking his head. "It's like fate." Kira gave a small smile. "It's more than luck, it's genetics. That variant runs in families with a very specific West African ancestry. Valerie had it, so did her mother, and now we know, so did you." I blinked. "Me? You and Valerie were more than friends," she said gently. "You were family, possibly cousins. There's no other way to explain why you and I share markers that only appear in related bloodlines." Edward looked stunned. "But she and Helen, they grew up together. Surely someone would have said something." "Not if no one knew," Kira replied. "Or not if they didn't want to know." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen, showing us another photo, this time of an old black and white wedding portrait. A young black woman with high cheekbones and piercing eyes standing next to a white man in military uniform. "That's my adoptive mother's aunt, Dorothy," Kira said. "My mom told me she moved to Millfield in the 1960s for a few years. Had a child out of wedlock. That child was Valerie's mother." I stared at the image, frozen. I'd seen that face before. Not in person, maybe, but in pictures, in Valerie's expressions and the slant of her smile. It all made sense now. "So Valerie and I whispered. "Your family," Kira finished. "It was right in front of you all along." I reached for Edward's hand across the table. He squeezed back, not as tightly as before, but steady and present. "It's strange," I said. "I spent years thinking I'd lost Valerie, and now, in the most unexpected way, I have a part of her back." "You have 2 parts," Kira said softly. "Me and the baby." My eyes filled. It was still hard to believe sometimes that she was carrying a child, that we were going to be grandparents, and not just to Emily's future children, but to this one too, the one growing quietly inside the woman I'd carried all those years ago. Edward cleared his throat. "Have you thought about names?" Kira smiled faintly. "Michael and I talked about it last night. If it's a girl, we're thinking Valerie Helen." Tears spilled over before I could stop them. I pressed a napkin to my face and laughed quietly through the sobs. That would have meant so much to her. "She's the reason I'm here," Kira said. "All of you are." Later that day, we gathered in the hospital garden for the first time as something that resembled a family. Thomas sat on a bench in a wheelchair, a blanket draped over his legs. Rochelle stood behind him, hands resting gently on his shoulders. Kira and Emily were deep in conversation by the fountain, their voices rising and falling in easy rhythm. Michael, Kira's husband, hovered nearby with a gentle, amused smile, watching the whole scene unfold like it was something sacred. Edward and I sat side by side on another bench, still recovering, still tired, but more alive than we'd felt in years. "It's surreal," he said, watching the girls. "I spent 3 decades wondering if I'd ever see her again, and now she's here. She's part of everything. I keep thinking about that first night we met her," I said. "How calm she was, controlled. But I see it now. She was carrying so much, and still she showed up. Every single day." "She's got your fire," Edward said. I laughed. "No, she has Valerie's, but maybe just a flicker of mine." Kira turned then and caught our gaze. She smiled, then looked at Emily, whispering something that made her laugh. That laugh, it echoed in a way that felt familiar, like it had always belonged somewhere inside us. As the sun began to dip behind the horizon, someone suggested we take a photo. "A proper one," Emily said. "No more waiting. This is our moment." We gathered near the garden trellis, blooming with early spring roses. Michael set the timer on the camera and ran to stand beside Kira, just in time. Thomas and Rochelle, Edward and I, Emily and Kira, 6 people, 3 generations, dozens of secrets, and somehow, peace. As the shutter clicked, I heard Kira say softly, "Say family," and we did. We said it like a prayer. Afterward, Kira pulled me aside. The others drifted toward the elevators, joking and chatting about dinner. "I'm not sure what comes next," she said. "I'm still trying to figure it out. But I want you to know, I'm glad you told me, even if it hurt." I nodded, my throat tight. "I'm glad you listened." She reached into her pocket and handed me something. A folded sheet of pale blue paper, Valerie's letter. "I think she meant for you to have this back," Kira said. "She wrote it for me, yes, but you carried the weight too." I clutched the paper to my chest, overwhelmed. "Thank you," I whispered. Kira smiled and touched my shoulder lightly. Then she turned and walked away, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the setting sun. That night, when we got home, Edward and I sat on the couch and read the letter again. Every word Valerie wrote all those years ago, every hope, every fear, every ounce of love. And as the last line trailed off, "She's meant for something extraordinary. I feel it. Please make sure she knows where she came from, even if I'm not there." I finally understood. She had always been right. Kira wasn't just extraordinary. She was everything. The seasons had started to shift by the time we left the hospital for good. The air was softer, gentler, threaded with the kind of warmth that only comes after surviving a long, unforgiving winter. Edward and I stood just outside the automatic doors of Brookside Medical Center, hand in hand, squinting against the early spring sun. For the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't patients anymore. We were people again, healing people, changed people. And we weren't alone. Kira had walked us out just as she had been there to welcome us in. There was something fitting about that symmetry. She stood beside us now, no lab coat, just a pale blue blouse stretched slightly over her growing belly. Her hands cradled it protectively, instinctively. "Your numbers are holding strong," she said. "No signs of rejection. It's pretty remarkable." "So are you?" I said, meaning every word. She smiled, the kind of smile that reached her eyes now. Not polite, not guarded, just real. We stood in silence for a moment, letting the wind brush past us. I wanted to say something profound, something that could summarize everything we'd been through. But how do you condense 30 years of silence, 6 weeks of revelations, and a lifetime's worth of emotion into a few parting words? "You were always meant to be extraordinary," I said finally. Even when we didn't get to see it happen. Kira looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who had once been a stranger. I saw Valerie. I saw Edward. I saw myself. I saw a daughter. "I don't know what kind of relationship we're going to have," she said softly, "but I think I'd like it to be something." "Something," Edward repeated, nodding slowly. "That sounds good to me." She leaned in and hugged us both, briefly but firmly, her arms around the people who had brought her into the world, then left her behind. "I'll keep you updated," she said, gesturing to her stomach. "About this little one. We promised to visit, to call, to stay in touch. This time there would be no disappearing into the fog of time and guilt." As we drove home, the silence between Edward and me wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. I watched the trees blur past the window, new buds just beginning to open, life pushing forward, always. "She's naming the baby Valerie Helen," I said softly. Edward didn't answer for a moment. Then, "I never thought I'd hear that name again without it hurting." "Me neither," I whispered. "But now it feels like a second chance." We pulled into the driveway of our house, the one that had felt too big and too quiet for so many years. Emily's car was already there. She met us at the front door with a wide smile and open arms. "How does it feel to be home?" she asked, helping Edward with his coat. "Strange," I admitted, "but good, very good." She made tea while we settled onto the couch, and we spent the afternoon talking, not about doctors or organs or DNA, but about everything else. She told us about her midterms, about the boy she was maybe sort of dating, and about how she'd started journaling again. "It helps," she said, "when things get too big." Later that evening, after she went upstairs, I pulled out the old shoebox from the top of our closet, the one with Valerie's letters, baby photos, and keepsakes. I spread them across the table like pieces of a puzzle I had only just learned how to complete. Edward came over quietly, carrying a frame. He set it beside the others. It was the photo we'd taken in the garden. All of us together. Kira, Emily, Thomas, Rochelle, Michael, and the two of us. Our crooked, tangled, beautiful family. I traced my fingers along the edge of the frame. "Do you think she'll ever call us Mom and Dad?" I asked. Edward considered that, then shook his head. "Maybe not, and that's okay. She has parents, good ones. But maybe someday she'll call us something. Something that means we made it through." The next few months passed quietly, but not emptily. There were phone calls, texts, emails. Kira sent ultrasound pictures, and Emily helped us set up video chats so we could see her face when she talked about cravings, morning sickness, and nursery themes. She liked soft greens and yellows, said she didn't want to know the baby's sex until birth. "I didn't get to be surprised the first time," she'd said with a smile. "I want to feel it all this time." Michael appeared on those calls more and more, always with a warm grin and the gentle demeanor of a man who understood just how lucky he was. I liked him immediately. He'd been patient, supportive, never pushing Kira to move faster than she was ready. When he thanked us, really, truly thanked us, for the daughter we'd brought into his life, I almost lost it. "You gave her the start," he said. "She took it and made the rest." When the baby came, right on time, early morning in late June, Kira texted us from the hospital. "She's here, healthy, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Valerie Helen Carter. No fanfare, no expectations, just an invitation." We visited the next day. The room was calm and warm, sun spilling in through the window. Kira was propped up in the hospital bed, her hair in a loose bun, eyes sleepy but bright. Michael held the baby in his arms, swaying slightly, whispering something only she could hear. When I stepped closer, he looked up and smiled. "Want to meet your granddaughter?" The world tilted just a little. I nodded. She was perfect. A swirl of both her parents, with dark, downy curls and tiny fingers that curled instinctively around my thumb. I didn't cry, not right away. I just stood there, soaking her in, letting my heart stretch to fit one more miracle. Kira watched us closely, then said, "She already likes you. Must be the voice or the hands." "She's beautiful," I whispered. "Thank you," Kira said, "for all of it." Edward stepped forward, resting his hand on my back. "You did good, kid." Kira chuckled. "You too, Dad." That word, it stopped him cold. He looked at her, eyes wide and blinking fast. Then he smiled. And it wasn't just joy, it was peace. After all the confusion, the guilt, the fear, she had given him peace. We stayed a while longer, not wanting to leave, but knowing this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. Something earned. Later, when we were back home and the evening light crept across the porch, I sat beside Edward on the swing and held his hand. "Can you believe it?" I said. "All this time, and now we have a granddaughter." He looked out at the yard where the flowers were just starting to bloom again. "I can believe it," he said. "It just took a long road to get here." I thought of Valerie. I thought of Kira, of Emily, of the baby girl with a name that bridged 2 generations of love and sacrifice. And I knew in the marrow of my bones that this story, our story, wasn't about kidneys or secrets or regret. It was about love. The kind you don't always understand at first. The kind that leaves, then finds its way home. The kind that forgives and begins again. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. If you're still here, it means this journey meant something to you, and that means the world to me. What this story taught me is that life rarely moves in straight lines. Sometimes the people we think we've lost come back when we least expect it, and sometimes healing shows up in the most unexpected form. Forgiveness is never easy, but when it comes, it can change everything. This was a story about second chances, about the weight of truth, and about how love, no matter how delayed or complicated, can still find its way home. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel and who they're reaching. And if you found this story moving, inspiring, or just beautifully human, please consider subscribing to the channel. We have more powerful, emotional stories coming your way, stories that remind us all what it means to be human. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.